All right, fifth grade. Today we have our lesson on the 1970s and the different things that change in the 70s. Lots of relationships with different countries change for America, and we have 3 different presidents in office. All right, lesson 1, we have the 1970s. Our objectives: we want to describe the success and failures of the Nixon and Carter presidencies and evaluate the gains made by women, American Indians, migrant workers, and consumers during the 1960s and 1970s. So the Nixon years, we start off. Richard Nixon, when he became president, he had a big focus on world events. 2 countries in particular he was really focused on, China and the Soviet Union. Now, he was focused on these 2 countries because they were both communist, and so they were someone that was on the United States radar for a while. He was able to build a good relationship with China's leader, and also with the Soviet Union. He limited the number of nuclear weapons we were both creating from the arms race, part of the Cold War. One bad part of his presidency was the oil crisis. We had relationships with Israel, and Egypt and Syria attacks Israel. So basically what we have in the Middle East is, since we are Israel's ally, and since most of the other countries over there are allies with Egypt and Syria, they didn't want to give us oil. So it became a lot more difficult for us to get oil. We didn't have as much. And because of that, the price of oil went way up. Oil prices, they began to rise. This is a sign of inflation. Here is the electoral map in 1968. That is when Nixon became president, his first election. You can see Nixon is in the red, and he was running against Humphrey, the Democratic candidate, and then you have an American independent, Wallace. And then he does get elected a second term in 1972. And you can see this is a landslide victory. We'll look at something that may have contributed to this. Nixon ends up resigning. If you know who Nixon is, this is probably what you remember him for. Here's the Watergate building. It's a hotel. The Democratic Party did some operations out of here. And what ended up happening is that Nixon, when he was running for re-election, he had people break in to the Watergate Hotel, into the Democratic office, and started to steal some information about the election, some strategies and stuff like that from the Democrats. Later he denied it. He said he didn't know anything about it, that he's not a crook. But eventually the truth comes out, and Nixon has to resign. Otherwise he would have been removed from office. He would have been impeached and then removed. And so he resigns, gave up his job. So his vice president was Gerald Ford, who then took over as president, and then Ford actually pardons Nixon. Nixon would have had to go to jail for what he did, but he got a pardon. All right, other groups also wanted rights. American Indians, the main thing they were seeking was good health care and education on their reservations that the government set up. They also wanted the government to honor earlier treaties. And then you have migrant workers. So immigrants who came here, mostly they worked on farms. They were paid very little and weren't provided health care. And that's kind of true today as well. You have Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, who led protests to improve those working conditions. And then Ralph Nader, who works to protect consumers' rights. So you, the person who buys the product, is the consumer. And then we have Jimmy Carter. He becomes president in 1976. That'd be after Ford. He was a peanut farmer. Fun fact. During his presidency, he signed the Camp David Accord, so like a peace treaty, basically. Remember, Egypt and Israel were fighting. He was able to negotiate peace. But same economic problems that Nixon had. The oil shortage, so which meant there was a gas shortage. It doubled in just 3 years. You can see when he gets elected in 76, which would be right about here, and then 1980. the oil price went really, really high. So it's about 4 times higher at that time than it is today. Like right now, our gas is around $2 a gallon, a little bit less. So they would have had around $8 a gallon for gas at that time. So after he's done, only after one term, and then you have Reagan, who's elected, who becomes one of the most popular presidents ever. So here's the Carter election. You can see Ford was running against him in the red, Carter in the blue. And remember, you need the electoral votes to win. And then the next year when Carter ran, not quite as successful. You have Reagan dominating. Our summary. Watergate forced Nixon to resign, and women, American Indians, migrant workers, and other groups worked for their rights. President Carter helped create the Camp David Accord that led to peace between Israel and Egypt. And then during the 1970s, inflation caused economic problems. That's all for lesson 1 of this chapter on the 1970s. Next time, we'll take a look at the 1980s.